On the question concerning the relationship between genes and nutrition, if you will, we need a little background information. Every physiological process, virtually, such as disease formation, begins with genes. In other words, genes are the fundamental blueprint of all physiological processes. In other words, it's the DNA. So we're learning now a great deal about all of our 100,000 or so genes that we have. Everything begins with the genes. It goes from DNA to RNA to protein, the enzymes and so forth. I mean, it's that sort of pathway. So we are a product of our genes in that sense. Okay. Now, of all these genes that we have, some of us have genes that have been maybe mutated, changed, or slightly altered in some other way to give an increased risk for some kind of disease. So we have a gene or two or three or whatever, I think it's 7 or 8 genes now, that seem to contribute to obesity. They're called obesity genes. We've got a couple of genes that seem to contribute to the formation of breast cancer, BRCA1, BRCA2. We've got genes that have been isolated to contribute to colon cancer. And so we get impressed with the idea that these genes, if we have these genes, we're going to get the disease. That's the sort of hypothesis, that's the thesis, that's the underlying sort of message that's coming out to the American public at the present time. Unfortunately, what is forgotten in that story is that these genes, here you have the DNA, these are the genes, they get translated to RNA, and then from RNA to protein, which turn out to be largely enzymes, that then contribute to disease or not. If we got some bad genes, we should not be making the conclusion that those bad genes are going to give rise to the disease at the end point. That's not the point. The point is, how do these genes get expressed? And what I mean by that is, how do these genes actually synthesize the RNA? And how does this RNA get synthesized to protein, get synthesized in the enzymes that contribute to disease? There's a whole many steps here. So even if we have a bad gene over here, we basically can control the expression of those genes by good nutrition. That's what we're learning. And when I say good nutrition, it turns out it's plant-based nutrition. Because as we begin to explore these relationships, the nutrients present in plants, either singly or as a cluster, tend to keep under control bad genes that we may have. Bad genes, I'm using the term a little bit advisedly, because bad genes can come from genes we may have been born with. They also can come from genes that are mutated or changed during our lifetime because of some attack with some chemical, such as a mutagen. So we can have either of those kinds of genes that we're born with or created after we're born, but nonetheless they have to get expressed. And so we're now finding that genes really have very little to do with disease formation if we eat the right food. And the whole notion of people believing that diseases run in families because we have the genes, such, for example, is a very fatalistic view. And in my view, it's an attempt, either intentionally or unintentionally, it's an attempt to not take responsibility for what one does with their lives. For those who wish not to change their diet or don't want to believe this, they say, oh, it's in my genes. And they just sort of eliminate from the mind because now they've got another excuse. But the fact of the matter is, if they make the right choices, they can control the expression of these genes. Not in every case. I mean, I confess, there are some genes that are obviously very deleterious and may be controlled only with great difficulty. But those are the rare genes, quite frankly. It's the common genes I'm talking about. Heart disease and cancer and diabetes don't come from, even though it begins with a gene action, we should not confuse that with the fact that it has to do with the turning on of these genes that really matter. That's the question, is turning them on. And nutrition can control whether you turn them on or turn them off.